From Chaos to Peace, the story of how I rebuilt my family and my life. I never imagined that one of the days that should have been the happiest of my life would end up scarring me so painfully. It was my daughter's welcome home party, not yet born, and I was radiant. I was 8 months pregnant, full of anticipation, tired, but happy. The house was decorated with such love. Each gift wrapped with colorful ribbons made me feel like our baby was already loved before she even arrived. But that day turned into a nightmare. It wasn't an accident, nor something unpredictable in life. It was caused by a family member, by a 14-year-old girl I'd always treated like a true niece, Leticia. My name is Carolina, I'm 29 years old, and until that moment, I thought I knew my family and my husband's family well. I've always been one to avoid trouble, to swallow my own horn, to believe that love and time solve everything. I grew up hearing that family is sacred and that fighting with relatives was wrong. But that day, with my huge belly and swollen feet, I saw the teenager running around the house, crying and screaming that nobody cared about her. Before I could comprehend what was happening, I heard the sound of breaking glass. When I got to the living room, the scene looked like something out of a horror movie. Gifts torn, toys broken, clothes thrown on the floor, and a pile of destroyed things. I froze in my tracks. I felt a heat rising through my body and a pain in my chest. I couldn't believe someone would have the courage to do that at such a special moment. People tried to calm Leticia, but she seemed possessed. She screamed that she hated everything, that this child was going to steal her family. All I could think was, how can such a young girl harbor so much anger? Mauricio, my husband, rushed to hold me because I was shaking so hard I felt like I was going to faint. My mother tried to save what she was giving me from the gifts, but it was useless. When Leticia was finally taken away by her father, João, and her mother, Paula, I sat on the couch and cried. I cried with pain, with anger, with helplessness. My daughter wasn't even born yet, and she had already been the target of hatred. The worst was yet to come. That same night, Paula called me. I thought it was to apologize, but what I heard was an attack. She said I was exaggerating, that Leticia was just confused, that I was making her jealous. She even called me evil for getting pregnant, knowing her daughter wouldn't have siblings. That was the first time I felt like truly cutting ties. I spent that night awake. Every kick the baby gave me seemed to mix with my anxiety. I felt guilty, as if I were somehow responsible for everything. Had I done something to make Leticia feel this way? Had I not paid enough attention? But at the same time, anger for Paula grew inside me. How could a mother advocate destruction instead of teaching her daughter to apologize? I knew I was starting. A conflict that went far beyond torn presents. The following days were a complete emotional mess. João texted me apologizing, saying he was ashamed of what had happened, but Paula remained firm in her stance that her daughter owed no one anything. The destroyed things weighed heavily on my heart, not only because of their material value, but also because of the care each person put into choosing them. It was as if they had ripped away not only the gifts, but also my joy at being a mother. I remember sitting in the baby's room, staring at what was left, feeling a huge void. Mauricio tried to comfort me, but he was also furious. When the baby was born, I still carried that wound. Paula's family didn't show up at the hospital, not a single message, and that hurt, because as angry as I was, I still expected some kind gesture. Months passed and nothing. Until one day, during a family gathering at my mother-in-law's house, Paula confronted me in front of everyone, saying I was purposefully pushing Leticia away. My daughter was 3 months old, and I could barely sleep, barely had time to think about myself. Hearing that was like being punched in the gut. It was on that day that Mauricio finally lost his patience. He looked at his mother and said he couldn't take it anymore, that either Paula stopped accusing him or they would drift apart for good. I felt a deep fear of losing my husband's family, but at the same time a sense of relief, because I was at my limit. That's when we decided to cut off contact with Paula and Leticia. No visits, no messages, no social media. I cried a lot that night, feeling like a villain for doing this, but I needed to protect myself and my daughter. At first, it was awful. I grew up believing that family is everything, so walking away from them felt like a failure. I felt guilty. I had nightmares about the scene of the destroyed gifts. Every time my daughter smiled, I remembered the hatred in Leticia's eyes. It was as if that memory was stuck in my head. I needed therapy to begin to understand that I wasn't to blame, that I hadn't caused anything, that the responsibility was Paula's. But even with rational understanding, the emotional pain took a long time to subside. Things truly changed almost 2 years later, when the truth finally came out. João asked to talk to Mauricio and me. He was divorcing Paula. I was surprised, but even more surprised by the reason. He explained that Paula had always manipulated Leticia, telling her she was no longer important because a new child would steal the family. Paula said I got pregnant for attention, that I was stealing her place as a mother. Hearing this was both painful and liberating. That day, as João spoke, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was as if someone had finally confirmed everything I felt, but hadn't had the courage to say out loud. He told me that Paula would cry when she heard the family talk about my pregnancy. He revealed that she couldn't have any more children, and that this left her so bitter that she began to take it out on me and Leticia. The most devastating part was hearing that Leticia truly believed she would be replaced, and that no one would love her anymore after my daughter was born. My heart ached for her. I imagined that 14-year-old girl so confused, hearing this from her own mother. I cried listening to João speak, not with anger, but with pity, with grief for everything that could have been different. But I also felt angry that Paula had never sought help, for choosing to attack me instead of dealing with her feelings. João said that Leticia was in therapy now, and that the psychologist herself had helped open his eyes. It was too late to fix the past, but perhaps there was hope for the future. After that conversation, Mauricio and I were in shock for a few days. It was as if we needed to rearrange all the pieces of the story in our heads. I wanted to hug Leticia, and at the same time, I was afraid of opening wounds I still carried. I decided to wait. I remembered when she was younger, the times I took her to the park, the afternoons we spent together coloring pictures. How had that sweet girl become someone capable of destroying a baby's gifts? The answer was there: manipulation, pain, lack of communication. I realized that life is much more complex than right and wrong. I also began to think about my responsibility from now on. I could choose to remain stuck in the hurt or try in my own time to rebuild some kind of bond with her. But I didn't want to do this out of family obligation. I wanted to do it because I felt I needed to, that it was right for my heart and for my daughter's future. I didn't want her to grow up hearing stories of hate, but rather learning that forgiveness is difficult but possible. Not in a naive way, but with clear limits. The healing process wasn't quick. I continued therapy and started keeping a journal where I poured out all my ugliest emotions, the ones I was embarrassed to admit out loud. I wrote about my anger, about wanting to yell at Paula, about my fear that history would repeat itself, and my daughter would also suffer from this kind of family dispute. I wrote about the love I felt for Leticia and how difficult it was to reconcile that with the hurt. With each therapy session, I understood a little more about myself. I discovered that I had a strong tendency to want to please everyone, even if it hurt me. I learned to say no. I learned to set boundaries. And above all, I learned that I am not responsible for the pain Paula chose not to address. This changed my life. I became more firm with everyone, including some family members who always interfered in my life. It was liberating and scary at the same time, because being firm sometimes makes people call you rude or selfish, but I was finally taking care of myself. A few months after the divorce, João asked Leticia to come visit his little sister. I trembled with fear the day they arrived. My daughter was almost 3 years old, talking, running, and I had no idea what that little girl meant to our story. When Leticia entered the room, I saw a mixture of shame and anxiety on her face. She was older, but she seemed so fragile. She stood still, watching my daughter play, and suddenly, unexpectedly, she began to cry. She cried like someone who'd been carrying a weight for years. She apologized. She said she hated herself for what she'd done, that she thought I'd never want to see her again. I hugged her, not because all was forgiven or forgotten, but because I knew this was the first step toward a new story. We both cried together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not fairy tale peace, but real peace, the kind that comes when you face your pain head on. After that day, things didn't suddenly become perfect. There were setbacks. There were times when I still felt angry, and Leticia still harbored insecurities. Paula tried a few times to get closer, but I kept my distance. Not because I hated her, but because I learned that some people need to be kept away for our mental health. João and Leticia continued with therapy. I continued to care for my daughter and myself. Little by little, we managed to create a healthy bond. Leticia started coming to parties, playing with her sister, and seeing that one's love doesn't take away another's. This was the greatest gift life gave me. It wasn't easy, it wasn't pretty, but it was real. I learned that life rarely follows the script we imagine, and that overcoming adversity isn't about forgetting, but about choosing to live without letting pain define everything. Today, looking back, I can see how much I've changed since that day I saw my gifts destroyed. I entered motherhood thinking I knew what love and protection were, but life showed me it goes much deeper. I learned that protecting also means setting boundaries, even if it means distancing yourself from loved ones. I learned that love isn't about silently accepting everything. And most importantly, I learned to differentiate between those who hurt me because they're hurt and those who hurt me because they choose to. This difference saved my sanity. I also learned not to be ashamed to ask for help. Therapy was the best investment I ever made. It helped me see myself as a woman, not just as a mother. It helped me recapture the Carolina that existed before motherhood, the one I thought had disappeared. This version of me is stronger but also more sensitive. I cry, I feel scared, but now I know how to deal with it. Before, I thought crying made me weak. Today, I know it makes me human. One of the biggest changes I've noticed in myself is how I deal with guilt. Before, I carried it all. If Letitia was jealous, I thought it was my fault. If Paula attacked me, I questioned what I did wrong. Today, I understand that everyone's responsibility is their own. I teach this to my daughter every day. I want her to grow up knowing that she can feel anger, sadness, and jealousy, but that it doesn't justify hurting others. I want her to know how to ask for help when she feels like she can't handle it alone. And most of all, I want her to know that one person's love never diminishes another's. I try to show this with actions, not just words. It's challenging because we always carry the models we received in childhood. But motherhood gave me the chance to break cycles. And I'm trying, even if imperfectly. Many people ask me if I've forgiven Paula. The answer isn't simple. I don't feel the anger I used to, but I also don't feel like having her around. My forgiveness was silent, internal. Not for her, but for myself, so I could live without carrying that weight on my chest. I think this is an important lesson. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You can forgive and still keep your distance. I chose this. For my mental health and my daughter's. Paula still tries to get closer sometimes, but I've learned to say no without feeling like the worst person in the world. And that, for me, is a victory. Because before, I would let her get close just to avoid upsetting others, even if it destroyed me inside. Another thing that changed was the way I see Leticia. Today, she's a 17-year-old teenager, full of dreams and still in therapy. I'm proud of her. Proud to see how she's learning to deal with her own emotions. She's told me several times that she regrets what she did, that she wishes she could erase that day. I always reply that the past can't be changed, but we can build something new. I know she still carries scars, but I also know she has the strength to move forward. Our relationship isn't that of a perfect aunt and niece, but it's real. There's affection, there's care, and above all, there's truth. I think that's worth more than any facade of a happy family. The greatest lesson from all this is that pain doesn't disappear, but it can be transformed. That scene of the destroyed gifts still lives in my memory. I still remember the sound of the glass breaking, my chest tightening, the tears burning my face. But today, that memory no longer defines my motherhood nor my life. It's just a part of my story. I've learned that life will always have moments beyond our control, but how we react makes all the difference. I could have shut myself down, harbored hatred, taught my daughter to hate too, but I chose another path. I chose healing, even if it was difficult. I chose therapy, conversation, boundaries, and that changed everything. If you're reading this and experiencing family conflict, I want to tell you, I know how much it hurts. I know what it's like to feel guilty for things you didn't cause. I know what it's like to lose sleep trying to understand what you could have done differently. I know what it's like to feel anger and shame at the same time. But I also know that it's possible to get out of this place. Not magically or quickly, but it is possible. We need to learn to set boundaries, even if it hurts. We need to seek help, even if others say it's a whim. We need to take care of our mental health like we take care of life, because that's what it's all about. Surviving, and little by little, truly living. I also learned that we don't have to fix everyone. For a long time, I wanted to change Paula. I wanted her to see the harm she was doing. But that wasn't in my hands. Everyone has their own time, their own process. And sometimes that time never comes. The only person you can change is yourself. I've changed a lot since that party. I've learned to be more assertive, more honest with myself. I've learned that my worth doesn't depend on anyone's approval. And most importantly, I've learned that I don't have to accept disrespect just because it comes from a family member. I'll carry that lesson with me forever. I also want to emphasize how important João was in this process. He acknowledged his mistakes, sought help, separated from a toxic relationship, and is rebuilding his life with Letitia. Seeing his effort made me realize that change is possible when there's a willingness. This inspired me to continue believing in family relationships, even after everything. My daughter now has a good relationship with her father, her uncle, and her cousin. This gives me hope that she will grow up understanding that family isn't about blood ties, but about who chooses to truly be. There. If I could go back, maybe I would have acted differently in some ways. Maybe I would have talked more with Letitia earlier, tried to understand her fears. But I can't change the past. I can only learn from it. Today, when I see my daughter playing with Letitia, I feel a mixture of relief and gratitude. Relief that we survived all of this. Gratitude that we found a path to healing, despite all the difficulties. This story taught me that there is always a way to move forward, even when all seems lost. That's why I wanted to share it here. Not because my life is perfect, or because I have all the answers, but because I know how much a sincere account can help someone who's hit rock bottom. If you're going through something similar, I want you to know you're not alone. The pain is real, but healing can be too. Don't be afraid to set boundaries, to seek help, to walk away if you need to. It's not selfishness, it's survival. And with time, you'll see that you can rebuild. With scars, yes, but also with great strength.